Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Family and Divine Legacy. Explanation. The patriarchal narratives focus on family dynamics, sibling rivalries, for example, Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, parental favoritism, for example, Joseph, and the transmission of blessings. These stories show how God's promises are fulfilled through flawed human families. Cultural role. Family is the foundation of Jewish identity, with genealogies in Genesis linking the patriarchs to the 12 tribes of Israel. This emphasis on lineage influences Jewish practices like naming children after ancestors. Example: Jacob's blessing of his sons, Genesis 49, assigns roles to each tribe, shaping Israel's tribal structure in later books of the Torah. 4. Literary and theological style. Theological narrative, not science or history. Explanation. Genesis is a theological text, using ancient literary forms to convey spiritual truths rather than scientific or historical facts in the modern sense. Its stories, for example, creation, flood, reflect the worldview of the ancient Near East but reframe it to emphasize monotheism and morality. Context. Ancient readers understood these accounts as explanations of divine purpose, not as competing with empirical science. For example, the seven-day creation framework is a theological construct to highlight order and the Sabbath, not a literal timeline. Significance. This allows Genesis to transcend cultural and temporal boundaries, focusing on universal questions of meaning and ethics. Modern Jewish interpretations often view Genesis as complementary to science, addressing why rather than how. Multifaceted genres. Explanation. Genesis blends narrative, genealogy, and poetry to create a rich, engaging text. Narratives, for example, Abraham's call, drive the plot. Genealogies, for example, Genesis 5, provide historical continuity, and poetic sections, for example, Genesis 49, add emotional depth. Literary technique. The text uses repetition, parallelism, and wordplay, for example, Adam, human, from Adamah, earth, Genesis 2:7, to reinforce themes and create memorability, reflecting its oral origins. Example: the creation account's repetitive structure, and there was evening, and there was morning, mirrors liturgical rhythms, making it suitable for communal recitation. 5. Cultural and religious impact. Foundation of Jewish identity. Explanation. Genesis establishes the origins of the Jewish people through the patriarchs and the covenant. It explains why Israel is chosen, why Canaan is the promised land, and why ethical monotheism is central to their mission. Practice. Genesis stories are woven into Jewish life. Creation informs Shabbat, the covenant underpins circumcision, and patriarchal narratives inspire resilience. For example, the Passover Haggadah references Abraham's journey as a model of faith. Rabbinic interpretation. Commentaries like Bereshit Rabbah explore narrative gaps, for example, Abraham's early life, to derive moral lessons, showing Genesis's ongoing relevance. Universal resonance. Explanation. While rooted in Jewish tradition, Genesis addresses universal themes, creation, sin, family, redemption, that resonate across cultures. Its stories appear in Christian and Islamic traditions, and its ethical concepts, for example, human dignity, influence global thought. Example: the flood narrative parallels stories in Mesopotamian texts, for example, Epic of Gilgamesh, but Genesis uniquely emphasizes God's moral judgment and covenantal promise. 6. Historical and cultural context. Ancient Near Eastern milieu. Explanation: Genesis was written in a world of polytheistic cultures, for example, Babylonian, Egyptian, where gods were capricious and creation was chaotic. Genesis's monotheistic vision, one God creating with purpose and morality, sets it apart. Example: the flood story in Genesis, chapters 6-9, shares motifs with the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, a great deluge, an ark, but Genesis frames it as God's response to human sin, with a covenantal promise, the rainbow, afterward. Authorship and redaction. Explanation: Jewish tradition attributes Genesis to Moses, inspired by God. Modern scholars propose a composite text, possibly combining sources, for example, Yahwist, Elohist, over centuries, finalized during or after the Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE, to strengthen Jewish identity. Significance: whether by Moses or later editors, Genesis's unified theological message, God's covenant and Israel's destiny, resonates across its diverse stories, making it a cohesive narrative. The purpose of Genesis as the cornerstone of the Torah. The book of Genesis, known as Bereshit in Hebrew, meaning in the beginning, holds a unique and pivotal position as the opening text of the Torah, the foundational scripture of Judaism. As the first of the 5 books attributed to Moses, Genesis serves as the theological, narrative, and cultural cornerstone of the Torah, laying the groundwork for the Jewish understanding of God, humanity, the world, and Israel's covenantal relationship with the divine. Its purpose extends beyond mere storytelling, functioning as a multifaceted text that addresses existential questions, establishes core beliefs, and shapes the identity and mission of the Jewish people. This exploration examines Genesis's role as the cornerstone through its theological framework, its influence on Jewish life and practice, its universal resonance, its historical and cultural context, and its enduring legacy. 1. Theological foundation, establishing God's nature and purpose. Genesis's primary purpose is to introduce the God of Israel as the sovereign creator, moral judge, and covenantal partner of humanity. From its opening verse, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," Genesis 1:1, the book asserts a monotheistic worldview that distinguishes it from the polytheistic cultures of the ancient Near East. This theological foundation is critical to the Torah's broader narrative, as it establishes the character of God and the purpose of creation, setting the stage for the laws, covenants, and history that follow in Exodus through Deuteronomy. God as creator. Genesis presents God as the sole, intentional creator who brings order out of chaos, tohu vavahu, Genesis 1:2. The creation account, Genesis 1:1-2:3, describes a structured, 6-day process where God speaks the world into existence, culminating in the Sabbath rest on the 7th day. This portrayal emphasizes God's omnipotence, wisdom, and goodness, as each act of creation is declared good and the whole very good, Genesis 1:31. Unlike ancient myths like the Babylonian Enuma Elish, where creation emerges from divine conflict, Genesis's God creates effortless through divine will, underscoring his supremacy and purposefulness. This theological assertion is foundational, as it establishes God's authority over all creation, providing the basis for his right to command and judge humanity in later books. Moral and relational God. Genesis portrays God as both transcendent and immanent, engaging directly with humanity. In the Garden of Eden, Genesis 2:3, God forms Adam from the dust, breathes life into him, and walks with him, indicating a personal relationship. After the fall, God's justice, banishing Adam and Eve, is balanced with mercy, clothing them and promising future redemption. Genesis 3:15. This dual nature, justice and compassion, runs throughout the Torah, informing laws like those in Leviticus and narratives like the Exodus. Genesis's depiction of God as relational sets the stage for the covenant, where God partners with humans to fulfill divine purposes. Purpose of creation. Genesis answers the question of why the world exists by suggesting that creation is for God's glory and humanity's flourishing. Humans, created in God's image, Salam Elohim, Genesis 1:26-27, are given dominion over creation and tasked with stewardship, reflecting divine creativity and responsibility. Rabbinic interpretations, such as those in Bereshit Rabbah, propose that God created the world for the Sarkei of the Torah and Israel, implying that Genesis's creation narrative anticipates the giving of the Torah at Sinai. This teleological view, that creation has a purpose culminating in covenant and redemption, makes Genesis the theological cornerstone of the Torah, as it frames all subsequent events as part of God's plan. 2. Shaping Jewish identity and mission. Genesis's role as the cornerstone extends to its function in defining the Jewish people's identity, origins, and mission. By tracing the lineage of Israel from Abraham through the patriarchs, Genesis establishes the covenantal relationship that distinguishes Israel as God's chosen people, a theme developed throughout the Torah. Origins of Israel. The patriarchal narratives, Genesis 12:50, focus on Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, whose descendants become the nation of Israel. God's call to Abraham, Genesis 12:1-3, marks a pivotal moment, promising land, Canaan, descendants, a great nation, and blessing, for all nations. This covenant, reaffirmed with Isaac and Jacob, defines Israel's purpose, to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, Exodus 19:6, though later. Genesis's stories, Abraham's faith, Jacob's transformation, Joseph's providence, illustrate how God works through flawed individuals to build a people, setting the stage for the nation's formation in Exodus. Covenantal identity. The covenant is the heart of Jewish identity, and Genesis introduces its key elements. The Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 17, includes circumcision, Brit Milah, as a physical sign, a practice that remains central to Jewish life. The promise of land ties Israel to Canaan, a motif that drives the narrative of the Torah, from the Exodus to the conquest in Joshua. The blessing to all nations, Genesis 12:3, gives Israel a universal mission, interpreted in Jewish thought as spreading ethical monotheism or modeling righteousness. Genesis's establishment of this covenant makes it the cornerstone, as all later Torah laws and narratives build on this relationship. Family as foundation. Genesis emphasizes family as the vehicle for God's promises, with genealogies, Toledo, linking the patriarchs to the 12 tribes of Israel. The stories of sibling rivalries, for example, Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, parental favoritism, for example, Joseph, and reconciliation, for example, Joseph and his brothers, highlight the human struggles within God's plan. This focus on family shapes Jewish cultural values, such as the importance of lineage, naming practices, and communal responsibility. By rooting Israel's identity in family, Genesis provides a relatable and enduring framework for Jewish continuity. Rabbinic amplification. Jewish tradition amplifies Genesis's role through commentary. For example, Bereshit Rabbah explores Abraham's early rejection of idolatry, portraying him as the first monotheist, a model for Jewish faith. The Talmud, for example, Sanhedrin 56a, derives universal moral laws, Noahide laws, from Genesis, suggesting that its narratives have ethical implications for all humanity. These interpretations underscore Genesis's foundational status, as it provides the raw material for Jewish theology and law. 3. Addressing existential and universal questions. As the cornerstone of the Torah, Genesis tackles fundamental questions about existence, making it relevant not only to Jews but to all humanity. Its narratives, creation, the fall, the flood, the patriarchs, offer insights into the human condition, the nature of suffering, and the hope of redemption, establishing themes that resonate throughout the Torah and beyond. Why does the world exist? The creation account provides a purposeful view of the universe, contrasting with ancient myths where existence is accidental or cyclical. Genesis's God creates with intention, and the Sabbath rest sanctifies time, giving life rhythm and meaning. This answers the existential question of purpose, suggesting that the world is a stage for divine-human interaction. Why is there suffering? The fall, Genesis 3, explains the origin of suffering as a consequence of human disobedience. Adam and Eve's choice to eat from the forbidden tree introduces sin, disrupting the harmony of Eden and bringing pain, toil, and death. Yet, God's promise of redemption, Genesis 3:15, the Proto-Evangelium, offers hope, a theme developed in the Torah's sacrificial system and prophetic visions. This narrative makes Genesis foundational, as it frames suffering as both a human problem and a divine opportunity for restoration. What is humanity's role? The concept of humans as God's image bearers, Salam Elohim, defines humanity's purpose, to reflect divine qualities like creativity, justice, and relationality. This idea influences Jewish ethics, such as the principle of Pikuach Nefesh, saving a life, and informs the Torah's laws on justice and compassion. Genesis's universal anthropology makes it a cornerstone, as it provides a framework for human dignity that underpins later commandments. Universal themes. While Genesis narrows to Israel's story, its early chapters, 1:11, are universal, addressing all humanity. The flood narrative, Genesis 6:9, shows God's judgment on universal sin, while the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, explains the diversity of nations and languages. These stories make Genesis accessible to non-Jews, influencing Christian and Islamic traditions and contributing to global ethical concepts like human rights, which draw on the image of God principle. 4. Influence on Jewish practice and worship. Genesis's status as the cornerstone is evident in its profound influence on Jewish religious practice, liturgy, and communal life. Its stories and themes are woven into the fabric of Jewish worship, shaping rituals, festivals, and ethical teachings that connect Jews to their origins and mission. Shabbat and creation. The creation account's culmination in the Sabbath, Genesis 2:1-3, is the basis for one of Judaism's most sacred practices. Shabbat, observed weekly from sunset Friday to Saturday evening, commemorates God's rest and sanctifies time. The Kiddush prayer recited on Shabbat references Genesis, linking the ritual to creation. Genesis's establishment of the Sabbath makes it foundational, as this practice defines Jewish identity and rhythm across the Torah, for example, Exodus 20:8-11. Covenantal rituals. The covenant with Abraham introduces circumcision, Brit Milah, Genesis 17:10, performed on the 8th day of a male infant's life. This ritual, still practiced today, symbolizes entry into the covenant community and connects Jews to their patriarchal origins. Genesis's introduction of this rite makes it the cornerstone for Jewish covenantal identity, influencing later laws in Leviticus. Liturgical and festival connections. Genesis stories are integral to Jewish liturgy and festivals. The Passover Haggadah references Abraham's journey and God's promises, framing the Exodus as a fulfillment of Genesis's covenant. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, includes readings from Genesis, for example, the binding of Isaac, Genesis 22, to emphasize faith and divine mercy. These connections show how Genesis shapes Jewish worship, providing narratives that inspire devotion and reflection. Ethical teachings. Genesis's narratives inform Jewish ethics. The story of Cain and Abel, Genesis 4, teaches the sanctity of life and the dangers of jealousy, while Abraham's hospitality, Genesis 18, models Haknasat Orchim, welcoming guests. These stories, cited in rabbinic teachings and sermons, make Genesis a source of moral guidance, foundational to the Torah's legal and ethical framework. 5. Historical and cultural context. Understanding Genesis's purpose as the cornerstone requires situating it within its historical and cultural context. Written in a world of polytheistic and cyclical worldviews, Genesis offered a radical monotheistic vision that shaped Israel's identity and theology, making it the foundation for the Torah's distinctiveness. Contrast with ancient Near Eastern myths. In the ancient Near East, creation myths like the Enuma Elish depicted gods battling for supremacy, with humans as mere servants. Genesis counters this by presenting one God who creates purposefully, loves humanity, and seeks relationship. The flood narrative in Genesis parallels Mesopotamian stories, for example, Epic of Gilgamesh, but Genesis's version emphasizes God's moral judgment and covenantal promise, the rainbow, Genesis 9:13. This reworking of common motifs makes Genesis foundational, as it establishes a unique theological identity for Israel. Formation of Jewish identity in exile. While tradition attributes Genesis to Moses, many scholars suggest it reached its final form during or after the Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE. In this context, Genesis served to strengthen Jewish identity among a displaced people, reminding them of their origins, covenant, and destiny. The stories of Abraham's journey and Joseph's exile resonated with exiles, offering hope of return to the promised land. Genesis's role as a unifying text makes it the cornerstone, providing continuity and purpose amid crisis. Oral and written tradition. Genesis likely began as oral traditions, later compiled into a written text. Its narratives, with their rhythmic language and memorable stories, were designed for communal recitation and teaching. This accessibility ensured Genesis's enduring role as the Torah's foundation, as it could be shared across generations, from ancient campfires to modern synagogues. 6. Enduring legacy and universal influence. Genesis's purpose as the cornerstone extends beyond Judaism, influencing global religious traditions, ethical thought, and cultural narratives. Its stories and concepts have shaped Christianity, Islam, and secular philosophies, making it a foundational text for Western civilization and beyond. Influence on Christianity and Islam. In Christianity, Genesis is the first book of the Old Testament, shaping doctrines like original sin, from the fall, and the promise of a Redeemer, Genesis 3:15. In Islam, the Quran retells stories of Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Joseph, viewing them as prophets in a monotheistic lineage. Genesis's universal narratives make it a shared text, bridging religious traditions while remaining uniquely Jewish. Ethical and philosophical impact. The concept of humans as God's image bearers has influenced global ethics, inspiring ideas of universal human dignity and rights. The covenantal emphasis on justice and compassion informs Jewish and Western legal traditions, while stories like the flood highlight the balance of judgment and mercy. Genesis's ethical framework makes it foundational, as it provides principles that resonate across cultures. Cultural narratives. Genesis's stories have permeated literature, art, and popular culture, from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, depicting creation, to modern films retelling the flood or Joseph's story. Its archetypes, creation, rebellion, redemption, shape storytelling, reflecting its enduring narrative power. As the Torah's cornerstone, Genesis provides a universal language for exploring human experience. Relevance today. In contemporary Judaism, Genesis remains a living text, studied in yeshivas, discussed in sermons, and applied to modern issues like environmental ethics, from creation stewardship, or social justice, from human dignity. Its ability to address timeless questions, why are we here? How should we live? Ensures its ongoing role as the Torah's foundation, relevant to both religious and secular audiences. 7. Genesis as a living text in Jewish tradition. In Jewish practice, Genesis is not a static text but a dynamic source of inspiration, interpretation, and debate. Its role as the cornerstone is evident in how it continues to shape Jewish thought through rabbinic commentary, mystical traditions, and communal study. Rabbinic interpretation. The Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah, and Talmud expand Genesis's stories, filling narrative gaps with theological insights. For example, rabbis speculate that Abraham discovered monotheism by observing creation's order, making him a model of rational faith. These interpretations keep Genesis relevant, showing its depth and adaptability. Mystical perspectives. In Kabbalah, Genesis's creation account is a blueprint for divine emanations, Sphirot, with each day reflecting spiritual realities. The Zohar, a key mystical text, sees Genesis as a map of the soul's journey, reinforcing its foundational role in Jewish spirituality. Communal study. Genesis is studied across Jewish communities, from scholarly chevruta, partner study, to family discussions at Shabbat tables. Its stories spark ethical debates, such as the morality of Abraham's actions or Joseph's forgiveness. This ongoing engagement ensures Genesis's place as the Torah's cornerstone, a text that invites continuous exploration. 8. Synthesis. Why Genesis is the cornerstone. Genesis's purpose as the cornerstone of the Torah lies in its multifaceted role. It establishes God's nature as creator and covenantal partner, defines Jewish identity through the patriarchal covenant, addresses universal questions about existence and suffering, shapes religious practice, and influences global thought. Its narratives: creation, the fall, the flood, the patriarchs, provide a theological and ethical framework that underpins the Torah's laws, history, and prophecies. By blending universal and particular themes, Genesis speaks to both Jews and humanity, offering a vision of a purposeful world guided by a just and merciful God. In Jewish tradition, Genesis is the starting point for understanding the Torah's message. God created the world with intention, chose Israel for a mission, and calls humanity to live in righteousness. Its stories are not relics but living texts, recited in synagogues, woven into rituals, and debated in study halls. As the cornerstone, Genesis holds the Torah together, providing the why behind its laws and the who behind its people. Its enduring power lies in its ability to inspire faith, provoke questions, and offer hope, making it as relevant today as it was in ancient times. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members. Leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.